The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker at Elkins Consulting. Whether you're sharing business stories or personal stories, the stories you share matter. They can affect all of your internal dialogue, your internal messages, how you experience yourself, and they definitely shape other people's perceptions of us. We have a tendency to choose and judge based on one interaction with another human being. And nobody wants to be judged by one experience that they've had in their lives. So I'm urging you listeners right now to pay attention to the stories you're sharing. How do you want to experience yourself? How do you want other people to experience you? And share the stories that demonstrate your values, what matters to you, because that's the only way we are going to deal with this disconnect and polarization in our communities. Today's guest is Alison Miller, and in the first 5 minutes of our conversation, we decided that we should open a commune somewhere and be in a place where everyone can actually care about each other and not have to listen to vitriol and political divisive commentary. And I'm so eager to get started in this conversation because I know we're going to have fun. Something interesting and intimate is going to come out of this. And I guarantee listeners that something in this conversation is going to inspire you to think differently, to take action, to be the person that you deserve to be, and that the people who love you deserve to have in their lives. Alison, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. It's a pleasure.
Yes, for sure. I'm really looking forward to this. So I mentioned that I love to start by asking my guests to share something about themselves that most people don't know about them. And as I mentioned in the intro to this episode, I do this because I like for people, our listeners, to have a more complex view of who you are, because so many times we are judged or labeled by one aspect of our lives. And by sharing a story like this, our listeners get to have a different perspective. So what are you thinking?
Well, I don't know why this came into my mind, but I'm remembering when I was probably 22 years old, and I had been living in Chicago for less than a year. And I was working for a psychologist doing research, and he had been running over many years, a longitudinal study studying individuals who were experiencing what we would call severe mental illness, people who'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia and other kinds of challenging mental health issues. And we would do the follow-up interviews. So us young 20-somethings would go out into the city and interview people. And I went to this basically like a residential facility. It was honestly kind of a way that we have decided that we're going to warehouse people and put them into a building, and give them the minimal of what they need. And I went and interviewed this gentleman there. And it was so interesting because he had struggled with very severe delusions and hallucinations his whole life. And I just remember he turned to me and he was like, I'm just a human who's misperceived many things for a long time. And I can see that's what my brain does. I don't really believe it anymore. But it seems like we've decided that this is the rest of my life. Like that because of what I went through, I can never live outside of this kind of experience. I don't know. It just really struck me in how we've decided as a society who gets to belong, who gets to move ahead, who gets warehoused, who gets forgotten, who's prioritized, who we give resources to, who we care about, who we give opportunities. And I don't know, it was struck me as there was something about him that actually reminded me of my own father. You could tell he was really intelligent and an astute observer of life, astute observer of things, and probably had a really great mathematical brain, was my sense from conversation with him. And he had just gone on a completely different path than my own father, right? But had we as a society been in a different relationship with what we define as mental illness, as like an expression of humanity, this is a human being living in our society. How do we decide that we make life work for people? I don't think I had this language at the time, but in the diversity of how we manifest as humans. And so, yeah, my whole life has really been about, ever since then, about just like serving people and helping people evolve and grow and reach their goals. And I would say, I think as a child, I was one of those people that was always called like, you're too idealistic. You're
and too sensitive, right?
For sure. Literally written on my kindergarten report card. She is too sensitive. It's still in my parents' closet. I have like evidence of the trauma written on a little piece of cardboard, right? You know, like, I'm not surprised, but I am honestly shocked that it's 2025 and these are the choices that we're making. When it is, we really have to imagine a whole other ways of living on this earth. I don't know. And that gentleman had me imagine what would his life been like if we had made different decisions about how we categorized him. You know.
Oh, yeah. We see that every day in children that are acting out for one reason or another.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's bring this to the present tense. Without telling us what you do, I'm going to ask you to tell us what you do by asking you to share a recent story of an experience you had with a client or somebody that you do what you do with, even if they're not necessarily a client, that you walked away from realizing that this is what you are meant to be doing right now. And I'm not under any delusion that what we do now is what we're going to do for the future. I'm adaptable, so I reinvent myself every few years. But in that moment of knowing I'm in the right place at the right time,
right,
that's the story I want to hear.
Yeah. Well, over the last 5 years, I've had a shift in my career, moving from working with individuals to groups. And I would say, you know, I'm trained officially as a psychologist, although I do not practice formally as a psychologist. The way that I was trained was, for the most part, healing and growth was viewed as happening through one-to-one, and it can. And I've done a lot of that one-on-one work with people. That there's something really remarkable that can happen in groups that just can't happen one-on-one. And that there are ways of, in a sense, creating new pathways for people, new sets of practices. There's something really powerful about practicing new ways of being and operating in community. And in a community that's fundamentally resting in compassion. It's really sourcing itself from the heart. And what I've witnessed is, well, we have this conversation about learning to work with the version of us who has shown up to do whatever it is that you're doing. Let's say you're working on, you're doing a piece of writing. The version of us who shows up to write is often resistant to writing, right? So what I've been
on it,
yeah, and that's completely normal. And what I have witnessed time and time again with different people that are in practicing ways of engaging with their work that are different than what they might do by default is people will stop themselves and say, wow, I just noticed that the version of me who's here right now is really unsettled by a meeting I had this morning. And actually, I'm going to take half an hour to see if I can process and metabolize what happened, maybe do some journaling about it. Maybe I need a cry. Maybe I need a sandwich. Maybe I need a walk. Like, I'm not expecting myself to be compatible with writing given what's going on in me. So I think what I see through my work is people being able to catch themselves in the moment, doing what they normally do by default. We're observing, we're not judging it. Like, oh yeah, that's my thing I do. What other options do I have than what I do by default? And I think that for anyone listening to this, if you can pause throughout the day, maybe have a post-it note that reminds you that says, what version of me is present right now? Where you're saying, hi, how am I doing? Because then, like the people that I work with, you will be able to do what I see them do, which is catching themselves, working in a way, engaging with their work in a way that's not actually really working for them. It's not producing the results they want. It's not really sustainable. It's not centering their well-being. Say, that's okay. That's not working. I'm going to try something different. And the trying something different, what I see people doing that I think is really beautiful to witness is I'm going to try something different experimentally. I'm not expecting or demanding that it work. I recognize that there's a trial and error to change, to growth, to expansion. Not everything I try works, but everything I try informs me. If it doesn't work or is not that successful, well, that's curious. That's interesting. Given that experience, what might I try next? You know what? I think I was moving too quickly. Maybe I need to slow down. Or wow, I was putting so much pressure on myself to sit down and write. Well, I don't think that's working. What else could I try? We keep noticing what we do and seeing what else is available. And I like to think of this as this is the only strategy you need. We notice the version of us who's shown up. Am I compatible with doing what I said I was going to do? Am I compatible with relating to you? Right? If I had just...
Alison, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm curious about a time that you did this, that you could tell a very specific instance. I know mine.
Okay.
So I am a Gallup certified StrengthsFinder coach. And I noticed that when I was trying to follow I'm air quoting the rules of being a writer, every article, every book, every podcast that talks about people who want to write, they get into routine. Every one of them talks about routine. I don't have the word routine in my vocabulary. Has never been something that has been inspiring to me or helpful. It pulls my soul out of my body when I try to have routine. It's so dissatisfying. And when I was writing my book, I started trying to get into routine because that's what everybody said I should do. And I did notice, because it was taking me months and months to write, even though I knew it was in me, because I was trying to do it with somebody else's tools. And then when I noticed that, I remember looking at my strengths and thinking, if you were coaching somebody with these talents, what strategies might you come up with together? Mm-hmm. And my biggest strategy was scheduling 15-minute increments all over my calendar. I live by my calendar. There's nothing routine in my calendar, but that's where I live to keep myself accountable. So I would schedule 15 minutes at 9 a.m. on a Monday, maybe 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, maybe noon on a Wednesday. But I'd just pepper my schedule with 15-minute writing increments. And I would block off a full hour just in case I got into flow. And when I realized that that was going to be something I was going to experiment with, as you said, I got my book written in like 6 weeks. And I was using it as an experiment. Here's one strategy I'm going to try and see if this works for me. So can you give a specific example of when you did this or one of your clients and how that showed up? Because you started with, you do this in groups. And I think that's an important qualifier. when you're talking about this kind of work? Because I do workshops with communication at work. So can you give us a very specific example of when this happened, when a client did A, or when you thought, kind of like when writing my book?
Yeah, I mean, usually it's something, these are things people are making again and again. It isn't like they do make one adjustment one time and then everything works from there on out.
I was not expecting it to work that well. It was an experiment. I was like, oh, that really worked. So now I use that strategy pretty regularly with ongoing projects that I'm struggling with inspiration.
Yes. Okay. Here's a really common one. People will notice that, like, and I can think of a specific story of someone saying, wow, when I showed up to work today, I didn't get anything done the first 3 hours. And when I sat here and journaled about it, I realized it's because I was insisting that I make up for lost time. I didn't work well yesterday either. So I came to the work session inside this energy of, I've got to make up for lost time. And the pressure level was so high, and I was expecting myself to do a quantity and quality of work to make up for the lost time that was not at all realistic. Wow, that version of me, it's kind of like, I think that we describe it sometimes as in our community as you're showing up to work like an overinflated tire. That's the version of you who's there. And interestingly, an overinflated tire is dangerous to drive on.
It is. It'll explode. And it makes the whole car wobbly.
Makes the whole car wobbly, unstable, and it's fuel inefficient because you're not actually making the quality of contact with the road when you've got that kind of pressure level. Your writing or any work you're engaging in many ways, if you could think about it from the point of view of the work, if the work could speak to you, it would say, hey, I'd really like it if you could come and make contact with me. So this person is realizing, wow, I'm showing up in this like an overinflated tire. I think what the adjustment that's needed to increase the compatibility between me and the work is I need to slow down the pace. I've got to de-escalate this urgent mode, this intensification that's going on. And then that becomes experimental. So that person, for example, is someone who does a lot of deep breaths, a lot of almost like you're blowing the pressure outside of yourself, deliberately moving and doing things slower. And then the other intervention that often happens is making a new plan that's more grounded in reality. Because when we're in this mode, we plan for the cartoon version of ourselves, the superhero version, where it would require a miracle for you to do that amount of work in that amount of time.
I'm Speedy Gonzalez. That's my character. It's nothing heroic. It's very fast and not always thinking.
Yes.
Yeah. So, when was the time that you did this? When this strategy worked for you?
Well, it's something that I would say is happening on a daily basis, which is tuning in and noticing. Often in the middle of the day, this happened. Here's a great example, actually, yesterday. I was leading a session. And when I lead my sessions, there's time where people are off doing their own work. And I had a call planned for 12:15 my time. And I'd had a nutty morning. And doing everything I planned to do, more or less, plus all the unexpected things and all the email that came in. And I just could feel, here, I'll give you a metaphor. Look, I have a snow globe here. Like if I shake a snow globe and the snow is everywhere, I could feel myself in that kind of like the snow's flying everywhere and the snow globe energy. And so I texted the person I had the meeting with and I said, any chance you can meet at 1:15 instead of 12:15? And she was like, yeah, that actually works better for me. And I went and I got into bed and I pulled the covers over me. I set a timer. I listened to some like kind of spoken word music that's very calming to my nervous system. And I practiced letting go. It's like I put the snow globe on the shelf and was letting the snow settle because I was listening to the version of me who was showing up to go into that meeting was like a shaken snow globe. I was just not as regulated and grounded as I would like to be. And that's actually newer for me, that I will rearrange things. I know it's not always possible. And maybe I've only would have had 5 minutes to do it. But the awareness for me of there's so many times, millions of times, it seems like I've moved into working or relating to another human being or going into a meeting where I wasn't really compatible with doing it. And I didn't make the adjustments needed. I still got through it. It's all fine. I feel like at the end of the day, when I make adjustments to help myself be more compatible with what I'm doing next, I end the day less stressed and less overwhelmed, less anxious, and better organized for the next day.
I love that example so much, Alison, making that choice. And if they couldn't make it 1:15, even saying, well, how about 12:30? If not, let's reschedule, if that's even possible. I love that story for a few different reasons. One is early in my coaching, I had a client that we got on a call and I had woken up with migraine. I'd taken some meds and gone back to bed, but I was still not feeling great. And instead of postponing the call, I forced myself to do it. I thought, well, I really need to just do this. So I sat in it and it did not go well. I was contradictory to my client. I was contradicting him. I was in some ways antagonizing him, and obviously not intentional. I want to bring my absolute best to my clients. And we both noticed that it didn't go well. And about an hour later, I sent him a text message and said, Joel, that didn't go well. I apologize. I woke up with a migraine and I should have known better than to bring that energy to our call. Can we please redo this session? Are you available Monday at whatever time? And he wrote back, thank you so much for acknowledging that. Yes, let's schedule a separate session. And when we talked, he was so grateful that I didn't just pretend like it didn't happen, that I acknowledged that it was me that brought that energy as a coach. And I felt so much better knowing that I had done that. And I can tell you that the next time something similar was happening, I noticed it way faster. And I said, I'm realizing I'm not in the right energy for this. So that's why I love what you're saying here, is that when we acknowledge that, if we miss the cues, but then we notice and it feels like it's too late, it's not. It's not too late. So now I'm curious about how you grew up and what impact that has on the work that you're doing now. And I ask this question because I remember in my household, we had a lot of kind of chaos in our household. And part of that was my dad was bipolar, but not diagnosed. And I remember really struggling with that chaos. And part of why my household now is not chaotic is very, like, people walk into our house and you can see their shoulders drop. They just feel comforted walking into our home. And I know people felt that way walking into my home as I was growing up because all the teenagers in our lives were invited. My parents never turned anyone away from our home. So people felt comfortable and loved in our home. But I always felt like this edge. Things were stressful. And now the way that I present our environment, no matter where I am, I think about that. How do I want people to feel when they walk into this room, my house, this call? So tell me about that, if you can, if that's comfortable for you.
Sure. Well, I grew up in a house with my parents and my brother actually outside of Philadelphia in Villanova. And my dad was a professor at Penn. And he was one of those people who got access to computer technology before the general public, and we had a computer at a very early, like it was like a bizarre, world that I lived in. And he was very, very focused on his work and very, very easy to irritate, right? And both of my parents, grew up with their different versions of trauma, right? That they grew up with at a time when there was no, before Oprah, let's put it that way.
Right.
Before there's like this whole kind of, industry of awareness that exists now. And I mean, I grew up in a house where I sort of had the sense from a pretty early age. And I can even remember at a very young age, I think I was under 3, where I was in a crib in a bedroom and there was a television on a cart. And I don't know why, but in my mind, it was The Price is Right. It was a game show where people yelled and ran toward the front, right? And I can remember having an awareness that something was wrong. That like I was not getting the quality of presence in the different forms it comes, certainly physical presence, touch, that I needed, And I think I really became someone who had this attitude of, I'm going to have to figure it out myself. I'm going to have to do it myself. I'm going to have to survive this myself. And I didn't realize that I was in effect kind of cutting off an aspect of my connection to myself, and the awareness that I could actually be there for myself. You don't know that as a child,
Right. Of course not.
Yeah. And I think that, being someone who was very, very sensitive, in a house where that was not really honored or recognized, I kind of went underground with it, where I thought it was a weakness to be sensitive. And I felt it was shocking how insensitive the world was, how insensitive middle schoolers are. In middle school, that's when I started to get interested in psychology. I was like, why are people treating each other this way? This is like, what is this really about? This does not make sense. Why would we choose this? Yeah.
Yeah. I wish more people would ask that question. Why is this okay?
Yeah.
Why are we allowing ourselves, to be treated this way, or allowing ourselves to treat other people so shitty? That's always a big question. I remember when our boys were little, our older son was in a class with another boy who would act out. He had pretty significant behavior issues, and he was bullying kids in his class. And he has an older brother, this kid. And one time my son came home, he's like, I just don't understand. I mean, I know he can be nice, but sometimes he's just so mean. And I said, have you ever watched him with his older brother? And Jacob said, well, yeah. And I said, what's that like? And he said, his older brother's so mean to him. I saw him push him really hard one time, and he teases him. He tells him really mean things. And I said, well, why do you think he's doing that to kids in your class now? And it was like this big aha moment. Oh, his brother's doing it to him, and so he's doing it to us. This is the behavior he's learning. And he's exerting his power because that's what his brother's doing to him.
Yeah.
And at some point I said, do you think he knows he's doing that? Jacob said, no, I think he wants to be nice. That was his comment. No, I think he wants to be nice. I said, well, maybe you could tell him that. Maybe next time he's being mean, you can say, Nathan, I know you want to be nice. You don't have to be mean like your brother.
Right. We always have choices, but the choices are not always apparent to us.
No, I think they're so rarely apparent to us. I think that's a big part of the issues we're experiencing in our communities now, is that we don't even realize how much power we have over our own psyche and this is behavior.
Yeah. I mean, it's really why, pausing and resting are so incredibly important, because when we are in kind of a more chronic survival mode, we can't really make contact with the range of choices that we have, because the choices that we have aren't something we can know just in our brain. It's really more when you kind of pass the mic from your brain to your body, and your body is like, yeah, why don't we settle down here a little bit? That would feel better. You know what? Let's take a deep breath. I have elderly parents, and when I go to their house, there's all kinds of things that happen that are activating to my system. For example,
all those triggers.
They play the television in 2 different rooms that are not, there's no sound, like there's no door between them. And one is in the living room and one is in the kitchen. And it's the same channel, but one is slightly delayed. So the combination of the 2 TVs, it creates a sound that has like a vibration that irritates my nervous system, right? And I know when I walk into the house, that irritant is there, that is a sense pushing a button in me that makes me less compatible with being the version of daughter to my parents that I want to be. So I have to manage that, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think every listener can relate to that moment of regression that we have when we're with our parents or our
Absolutely.
siblings.
Absolutely. And, a lot of times what I do is when I speak to, particularly to my mother, where I get irritated by her telling me something that's like gossip that I really don't want to hear, but then not remembering she told me, and now she's telling me like a 3rd, 4th, 5th time. And I'm like starting to get not nice. I will often like within 10, 15 minutes go excuse myself upstairs and have like a reset, because I have limited time left with them on earth. And I want to be with them to the degree it is possible in the way that I wish they had been with me.
Present.
No one's been that
Conscious.
way with them. Yes.
Right. And that's why they were that way with you, because no one was like that with them.
No one was with it. And
yeah.
I know, and I
it releases that judgment, right?
Absolutely.
And, yeah. I think about that a lot when I'm regressing and not being very nice to my mother, which happens.
It happens. Yeah.
It happens. Well, I appreciate that you honor that place in you that needs the space so that you can bring your best self, the one that you can be proud of. I can't even tell you how many times I've walked away from a visit with my mom feeling so much shame about not being the person I want to be when I'm around her. And I beat myself up. Why can't you just, right?
Yeah.
All the shoulds start popping into my head. Yeah. You should appreciate that she's this and she's that. And I feel the same way. I look at my kids and they come home and I think, oh my gosh, please let me have a different relationship with my kids than I have with my mom. And that's a big one for me. So when you think about the best parts of what you do, the joy that you receive from the work that you do, tell me an example of that, of when you've walked away just feeling like either joy or awe or satisfaction.
Well, I'm going to have to share what I do to tell the story.
Okay.
So I'm an academic entrepreneur. After I got my PhD, I opened up a coaching and consulting company called The Dissertation Coach that specifically helped people get their PhDs. I sold that business a year ago to focus on a newer business that I started during the pandemic called the Academic Writer Space. And it's a virtual co-working community, predominantly graduate students and other kinds of academic writers, where we come together in a co-working environment and get our work done together side by side over Zoom.
Yes, I do co-working space over Zoom as well. Yeah. Different, obviously.
Well, I'll give you a specific story. Someone who had shared her challenges along the way and how it was a very stressful journey, as it is for many people to get a PhD. during a global pandemic, very difficult. And just one day she showed up with her graduation cap on. And we didn't even know she was defending. We didn't know we knew she was getting closer to the end, but like she just came after she had graduated. And I can remember different points along the way where this person would have like a revelation, which would start to shift and change. It didn't fix everything or solve anything. It was still a very stressful journey, but there were enough tools in place to be able to intervene on behalf of herself in so many moments where she would have just given up on working altogether and realized, well, even though I'm not compatible with doing what I planned I was going to do, if I make some adjustments, I could be compatible with this. And so I'm going to go do that. And then we'll see where we go from there. You start to like really, that was someone who was really learning to use the tools that we teach and was really learning to work with the version of her who was showing up. And like, by the way, the really good news about this little thing that I'm saying here, learning to work with the version of you who showed up, we could also say learning to relate to others with the version of us who shows up, is that we don't have to figure out how we're going to work effectively or relate effectively for the rest of our lives. That is not something that's knowable. But what is more knowable is for you to say, well, I'm going over to my parents' house right now. I have a drive over there. On my drive over, I'm going to imagine how I want it to go. How do I want it to go? How do I want to be? And I can notice, am I compatible with that? I think of it as like when I'm driving over my parents' house, it's about a 20-mile drive. I'm cleaning the pipes. I'm listening to calm, soothing music. I maybe a podcast. I'm breathing. I'm remembering times when I've really been like my mother fell recently and my father and I could not get her up off the ground. And for some reason in that moment, I was just really felt free in my heart. And I was like, Mom, it's all right. Sometimes we fall down. And you know what? You had the whole family over for dinner last night. It makes sense that you're tired. We're going to figure out how to get you up off the ground. Don't worry. Right? Now, that I am not always compatible with showing up that way. But I felt like I was able to honor her dignity and not make her feel bad. And that is how I want to be. But it was helpful that the day before on my way over, I was like, we are shifting into being with elderly parents mode. That's different than how you are at home. There's a different kind of mindfulness and pace I have to operate in. And when I'm upstairs working, hustling through my day, and then I'm going to go downstairs, I like pause at the top of the stairs. Like I'm going down the stairs,
separation,
acclimate to something different, right?
And which is not the same thing as compartmentalizing. And I think that's a really, really important distinction here.
Yes.
Because we cannot separate our personal lives and professional lives. We are so integrated with all of what we do. And if you are trying to separate it, you're not bringing your whole self to either. So I think it's really important to understand that distinction. What do you think about that?
Well, I never really thought about it that way before. So it's really a way of, rather than compartmentalizing where we're treating things as if they are separate when they really can't be, is having this sense of you are a human being who can step back and hold space for the fact that there's all kinds of things going on in your life that are hard, that are competing for your time and attention, that are overwhelming. It's a lot. Mm-hmm. Like we're recording this in January 2025. I mean, it's a lot going on. It's a lot, right? And I want to keep, personally, I want to be able to keep my heart open to that, but to like realize I can't be attending to everything all the time. And I'm allowed to let some things, it's kind of like, I live in LA, so this is present on my mind. When we put out every single little fire, like in forests, a lot of fuel builds up so that the potential for an explosive fire is going greater. By the way, I'm not an expert in fire management, but I know that there's some thought that policy enacted 100 and something years ago to put out every forest fire. has actually been harmful. And it's kind of like that in life. If we feel like we are constantly needing to pay attention here and here and here and do this and be all over the place, we're never really doing anything in depth because we're staying up at the surface, switch tasking all the time. And that really, we need to be able to not so much compartmentalize, but release and surrender that I'm not attending to that right now. I'm not working on that right now. I'm letting that fire burn temporarily. Because if I don't, eventually I'm going to have a massive forest fire in my life, which is nothing is getting done in a heartfelt, deeper contact kind of way. I'm not really making deep contact with anything because I'm up here. I'm just kind of all over the place, you know? So
it's more about giving yourself space to transition from one thing to the other.
Yes.
And prioritizing that. Yeah. And it's a very big distinction from compartmentalizing, I think. And again, I find that distinction really important because I heard somebody talking about how he has to compartmentalize as an ER physician between what happens there and what happens at home. And I said, well, yeah, to a certain extent, you have to be able to leave that behind and not bring it home with you. That's not the same thing as compartmentalizing. Compartmentalizing means that you're bringing one person here to one part of yourself to this and one part of yourself to that, which all that does is create fissures in who you are.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's important. So I'm going to come back to your moment of joy. And I would say joy, satisfaction, and awe were probably all wrapped up. When you're looking at the Brady Bunch heads on your co-working space, and one of them turns on the camera, showing up in their cap and gown from graduation. And everyone there gets to see this woman in her confidence and relief and celebration. And you know you contributed to this satisfaction of her moment, to this shift in who she is and how she sees herself. And I can just imagine the energy among you, everyone celebrating for this woman.
Mm.
And I can imagine your satisfaction in seeing hers. And the reason I say joy is that you can't not feel somebody else's joy. And she had to have been exuding it in that moment.
Yeah.
And awe, because when I find awe in my own success sometimes, when not that I didn't expect something to work, but when it works so well that I wonder kind of how it happened. I know I put in all the hard work, but I still have this, so many different things had to happen. I don't believe in coincidence. So all these different little things had to happen, had to come together in order for me to have this impact. And that's awe. Like this, it didn't just happen in a vacuum.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I feel a lot of just immense gratitude because what I'm doing now really happened on accident. I was running a different business. This was, I couldn't even imagine something like this could have even been possible. The only reason it could have come into existence, I truly believe, was because of the pandemic. Because we started doing it for free for clients in our business. And pretty quickly I realized, I'm ready to move on from one-on-one work, like altogether. This is my jam right here, you know? And I feel very grateful that I don't know how to describe it, but it feels to me like there is a wisdom that exists in a space that's been created with me and our facilitators and all these other people. There's a woven rug of wisdom that is happening that I'm definitely playing a role in. Absolutely. And I bring a quality of thought leadership to what's happening here. And I'm very grateful that for some reason, my brain, what's coming online in me and what's occurring to me and what I'm observing and noticing seems to be ever changing and deepening. And it's, you know, what I am actually practicing authentically in my own life. And that I have intersected with this this group of ever-changing group of people that are members of our community who are weaving their wisdom into the conversation in a way that's making it something that I could not make it on my own, that exists between us. And I'm very grateful for that. Yes.
Yes. And there's all in that too, in a community that comes together like that. I am in awe of the community that I've witnessed in LA. I have lots of friends who live in LA and near LA. And we have firefighters that I know here in Montana that serve on wildfire crews that are in LA now helping. And I'm in awe of that. So I love this whole idea of shifting from this one-to-one to the group, not because of anything business process. Like, it's not about scaling. This is about what can happen in community versus what can happen one-to-one. And one-to-one is critical. I am not dismissing that in any way. I'm suggesting that building community, finding community, and living in that space can take things to such a whole new positive level, because you're leveraging all of the love and the community. You're leveraging the brilliance and the strengths of each person in that room. Yes. It's not just a talking head talking to a group. You're in community. So
yeah, and the communities, when they come together, the unique. Every community is going to be unique in what it can express and what it can make possible, and that is what's just so remarkable, is that there's a way in which I think we can feel seen and understood and know that we make sense and bear witness to people growing and changing and experimenting, and we learn so much from each other. That's just so it's really vital that we also really open up communities of a much more diverse groups of people are encountering each other and getting to know each other, so that we don't demonize each other.
Which takes us right back to the beginning of our conversation. Understanding how complicated people are and not anchoring them in time based on one interaction or one Facebook post or one shitty decision.
So, one interaction,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I love that. Our listeners are probably going to want to look you up. Where are you most active, where people can see the content that you create?
You can look up the same handle on Instagram and TikTok, where you can see videos of me talking about these ideas. They're relevant even to non-academics, and it's just the Academic Writers Space, which is also the Academic Writers Space is also our website.
So, listeners, the links to Alison's website and her social media accounts will be incorporated in the show notes for this episode at elkinsconsulting.com. Alison, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your time and energy.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure. So glad to be here.
Listeners, now it's your turn. I would love to hear from you. What part of this conversation resonated with you? What will you do? What action will you take to be in community, to grow, to learn, to connect in an authentic way with people with diverse backgrounds and experiences in their lives that are very different from yours? And when will you take that moment to decide who you're going to bring to your next conversation with your mother or somebody else that maybe triggers you sometimes, but who you love and really choose to have a relationship with within the boundaries that you need to set for your own mental and emotional well-being? I would love to hear from you in the comments. And if you have any questions for Alison, don't hesitate to ask. Thanks for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You. How you tell them will.
That's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.